I hadn't seen my son in 2 years. He finally invited me to dinner at his new house. But when I arrived, the maid stopped me at the door and whispered, "Don't go in there. Run away." Why would a stranger warn me against my own son? 5 minutes later, I watched from the shadows as my son's true plan was revealed. The GPS led me down a winding street lined with pristine lawns and towering oak trees. Lucas had done well for himself, better than I'd imagined. His new house stood like a monument to success, all clean lines and expensive stonework, with a circular driveway that could fit 6 cars. I parked my old Honda behind a sleek Mercedes and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. At 62, I looked every day of my age. My graying hair was neatly combed, my best shirt pressed, but I still felt like I was dressed for the wrong occasion. 2 years of silence between a father and son leave scars that don't heal with a simple dinner invitation. The front porch was adorned with carefully arranged potted plants and a security system that looked like it cost more than my monthly pension. I pressed the doorbell and heard melodic chimes echo through what sounded like a mansion. The door opened, but instead of Lucas or his wife Kira, a middle-aged Hispanic woman in a simple black uniform appeared. Her eyes darted nervously behind me before settling on my face. "Mr. Yeager?" she asked quietly. "Yes, I'm Martin Yeager, Lucas's father." Her expression changed instantly. Fear flickered across her features, and she glanced over her shoulder into the house. I could hear voices and laughter from somewhere inside, the sound of a dinner party in full swing. "Sir," she whispered, stepping closer to me. Her voice was barely audible. "Don't go in there. Run away." I stared at her, confused. "Excuse me?" "Please," she insisted, her accent thick with urgency. "I am Mrs. Rojas. I work here only 3 weeks, but I hear things, see things. This dinner, it's not what you think." Before I could respond, Lucas's voice boomed from inside. "Dad? Is that you at the door?" Mrs. Rojas's eyes widened with panic. "I cannot say more, but please, senor, trust me, leave now." "Dad!" Lucas appeared behind her, his $1,000,000 smile gleaming. He was taller than I remembered, his hair perfectly styled, wearing a crisp white shirt that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. "There you are. Come in, come in." Mrs. Rojas stepped aside reluctantly, her warning look burning into my memory. Lucas embraced me with the kind of hug that looks warm but feels cold. All performance, no substance. "You look great, Dad. Really great. Come meet everyone." I followed him into a foyer that belonged in a magazine. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, fresh flowers arranged with professional precision. But Mrs. Rojas's words echoed in my mind. "Run away." "Who's everyone?" I asked, noticing several coats hanging on an ornate rack. "Oh, just some neighbors and friends. Kira thought it would be nice to have a little gathering. You know how she loves to entertain." Through the archway leading to the living room, I caught glimpses of well-dressed people holding wine glasses, their laughter polished and artificial. This wasn't the intimate family dinner I'd been expecting. "Lucas," I said, stopping in the hallway. "When you called, you said it would just be family. You, Kira, and Veda." His smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Plans changed, Dad. Kira invited a few people. Nothing wrong with that, right? Unless you have a problem meeting our friends." There it was, the subtle accusation, the implication that I was being difficult. It was a tone I remembered from his teenage years, refined now with adult sophistication, but carrying the same underlying resentment. "Of course not," I said. "I just wasn't prepared for—" "Mr. Martin!" A small voice interrupted us, and my granddaughter Veda came running down the hallway. At 8 years old, she was the spitting image of Lucas at that age, all bright eyes and boundless energy. She wrapped her arms around my waist, and for the first time since arriving, I felt genuine warmth. "Hey there, sweetheart," I said, kneeling to her level. "You've grown so much." "I missed you, Grandpa," she whispered, and I caught something in her voice, a tremor that didn't belong in a child's greeting. "Veda, honey, go play in your room," Lucas said firmly. "The adults need to talk." "But I want to stay with Grandpa." "Go, now." She looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and I saw the same fear I'd glimpsed in Mrs. Rojas's face. What was happening in this house? "I'll come see you later, okay?" I promised her. She nodded and ran back upstairs, but not before glancing over her shoulder with an expression far too serious for a child. "Sorry about that," Lucas said, his tone lighter again. "She gets excited. Come on, let me introduce you to everyone." As we walked toward the living room, I noticed something odd. The study door, a heavy wooden door with decorative glass panels, was not only closed but had a large decorative plant positioned in front of it. not blocking it entirely, but certainly discouraging anyone from approaching. "Nice place you have here," I said, gesturing toward the study. "Home office?" "Something like that," Lucas replied quickly. "Not much to see in there, just boring paperwork and files. You know how it is." I knew how it should be, but Lucas had never been one for paperwork or organization. In college, his apartment had looked like a tornado hit it. The idea of him having a meticulously organized home office seemed unlikely. We entered the living room, and Lucas immediately launched into introductions. There was Glenn Hart, the HOA president, a pompous man in his 50s who spoke about property values with religious fervor. Janet and Bill Morrison from down the street, a couple who seemed more interested in the expensive wine than in meeting me, and Dr. Patricia Wells, who lived in the corner house and apparently served on 3 different community boards. "And you all know my wife, Kira," Lucas said, as a stunning blonde woman glided over to us. Kira Yeager was the kind of beautiful that required maintenance. Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect smile. She kissed my cheek with lips that felt like they'd never touched anything warmer than champagne glasses. "Martin, so wonderful to finally have you here," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Lucas talks about you all the time." That was interesting, considering Lucas hadn't called me once in 2 years until this dinner invitation. "Thank you for having me," I said. "Your home is lovely." "Oh, this old thing?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We're thinking of renovating again. Maybe expanding. You know how it is? You always need more space." Glenn Hart raised his wine glass. "To expansion and to new opportunities." The others echoed the toast, but I noticed they were all looking at me when they said it. Not at Lucas, not at Kira, at me. Their smiles were too bright, too eager. "Dinner will be ready in just a few minutes," Kira announced. "Mrs. Rojas is just finishing up in the kitchen." I excused myself to use the restroom, but really I wanted to think. Something was wrong here. Mrs. Rojas's warning, Veda's fearful expression, the oddly formal gathering, the locked study, none of it made sense for a simple family reunion dinner. The bathroom was down a hallway that led past the kitchen. As I walked by, I heard voices inside, Kira and Mrs. Rojas talking in hushed tones. "Told you to keep him outside until everyone arrived," Kira was saying. "I am sorry, Senora. He seemed like such a nice man. I could not—" "You could not what? Do your job? We talked about this, Maria. Tonight is very important. Everything has to go exactly as planned." "But, Senora, what you are doing?" "What I'm doing is none of your concern. You're here to serve dinner and clean up. That's it. Do you understand?" There was a long pause. "Si, Senora, I understand." I hurried past the kitchen to the bathroom, my mind racing. What were they planning? And why did Mrs. Rojas feel compelled to warn me? When I returned to the living room, I found Lucas deep in conversation with Glenn Hart. They were standing by the fireplace, speaking in low voices, but I caught fragments of their discussion. "Should be straightforward," Glenn was saying. "All the paperwork is ready." "And you're sure about the timing?" Lucas asked. "Monday morning, first thing. The bank opens at 9 and we'll be there at 9:15. By noon, everything will be finalized." "What about—" Lucas noticed me approaching and smoothly changed topics. "Dad. Perfect timing. Glenn was just telling me about the new community center they're building." Glenn Hart's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh yes, it's going to be wonderful. A real asset to the neighborhood. Of course, these things require significant investment from community members." "Investment?" I asked. "Well, you know how these things work," Glenn said, waving his hand vaguely. "Property assessments, special fees, that sort of thing. But don't worry. I'm sure Lucas has everything handled." Lucas nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. Everything's taken care of, Dad. You don't need to worry about anything." That phrase, "you don't need to worry about anything," sent a chill down my spine. In my experience, when someone tells you not to worry, that's exactly when you should start worrying. Mrs. Rojas appeared in the doorway. "Dinner is served," she announced, but her eyes found mine for just a moment, and I saw the same warning there. As we moved toward the dining room, I made a decision. Whatever was happening here, I needed to understand it, and if Mrs. Rojas was willing to risk her job to warn a stranger, then I owed it to both of us to listen. The dining room was set like something from a magazine spread. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, fresh flowers, and candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. But all I could think about was the fear in a maid's eyes and the cryptic conversation about Monday morning bank appointments. I took my seat at the table, smiled at the assembled guests, and began planning my own investigation. Dinner was a performance worthy of Broadway. Kira played the perfect hostess, ensuring wine glasses never emptied and conversation flowed like a carefully choreographed dance. Lucas held court with stories about his recent promotion at the marketing firm, his success with new clients, his bright future. But I was watching the spaces between the words, the glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, the way Mrs. Rojas moved through the room like a ghost, silent and efficient. "So, Martin," Dr. Wells said, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon, "Lucas tells us you're retired now. What do you do with all that free time?" "I keep busy," I said. "Reading, some consulting work here and there, nothing too exciting." "Consulting?" Glenhart leaned forward with sudden interest. "What kind of consulting?" I noticed Lucas tense slightly. "Just some engineering projects for small companies. Reviewing plans, that sort of thing." "Dad's being modest," Lucas said quickly. "He's practically hermit these days. Barely leaves his apartment." That stung, partly because it was true and partly because of the way he said it, like I was an embarrassment, a relic to be managed rather than a father to be respected. "Well," Kira said brightly, "that's all going to change now, isn't it? Now that we're all back in touch." "Is it?" I asked. She blinked, her smile faltering for just a moment. "Of course. Family is so important. We've missed having you in our lives." "Funny," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I don't remember getting any calls or letters expressing that sentiment." The table fell silent. Janet Morrison suddenly found her salad fascinating. Bill Morrison cleared his throat and reached for his wine glass. Dr. Wells glanced between Lucas and me like she was watching a tennis match. "Dad," Lucas said carefully, "you know how busy things have been. The new house, my job, Veda's school. 2 years, Lucas. 2 years without a phone call." "You could have called too," he shot back. And there it was. The real Lucas. The one who kept score of every perceived slight and never forgot a grudge. Boys, Glenhart interrupted with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "This is supposed to be a celebration, a reunion. Let's not dwell on the past when the future looks so bright." "You're absolutely right," Kira said, her hostess mask sliding back into place. "In fact, we have some wonderful news to share with everyone." Lucas straightened in his chair, and I caught something pass between him and his wife, a look of anticipation mixed with nervousness. "We've decided," Kira continued, "to establish a family trust, something to secure Veda's future and bring the family closer together." "A trust?" I asked. "It's really quite simple," Glenhart said, and I realized he wasn't just a neighbor making conversation. He was part of whatever this was. A way to consolidate family assets, ensure proper management, that sort of thing. Very common in neighborhoods like this. "What kind of assets?" I pressed. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you know. The house, some investments, and—" He paused, glancing at Kira. "And your inheritance, of course," Kira finished smoothly. "The property your parents left you. It would be so much better managed as part of a larger portfolio." A chill swept through me. My parents had left me a small house and some savings. Not a fortune, but enough to keep me comfortable in retirement. It was the only security I had. "I'm not sure I understand," I said slowly. "My inheritance is already being managed. By me." "Oh, Dad," Lucas said with a patronizing smile. "You're getting older. Wouldn't it be easier to let someone else handle all those complicated financial decisions? Someone younger, with more experience in these matters." "Someone like you?" "Someone like us," Kira corrected. "As a family." Mrs. Rojas chose that moment to refill my water glass, and as she leaned over, she whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "The study. After dinner." I nodded almost imperceptibly, and she moved on to the next guest. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and artificial laughter. Glenhart regaled us with stories about property values and community improvement projects. The Morrisons talked about their recent cruise. Dr. Wells discussed the challenges of managing her medical practice. But underneath it all, I felt the current of something darker. The way Lucas and Kira exchanged glances. The way Glenhart kept steering conversations toward financial planning and family responsibility. The way everyone seemed to be waiting for something. When dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week, Veda appeared in the doorway wearing her pajamas. "Mommy, I can't sleep," she said in a small voice. "Sweetheart, we have guests," Kira said with strained patience. "Go back to bed." "Can Grandpa tuck me in?" Veda asked, looking directly at me. "I'd be happy to," I said, starting to rise from my chair. "Actually," Lucas said firmly, "I think Veda needs to learn to go to sleep on her own. She's getting too old for tucking in." Veda's face crumpled, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. But I missed Grandpa. I haven't seen him in forever. Because Grandpa was too busy to visit us, Lucas said, and the cruelty in his voice made me want to reach across the table and shake him. That's enough, I said quietly. Excuse me? I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. I said that's enough. Don't use your daughter to score points against me. The room fell completely silent. Glenn Hart's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The Morrisons stared at their plates. Dr. Wells suddenly seemed very interested in her phone. Dad, Lucas said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I think you're overreacting. Am I? Or am I finally reacting appropriately to 2 years of being shut out of my granddaughter's life? You shut yourself out, Kira said coolly. We invited you to visit. You were always too busy. That was a lie, and we all knew it. They'd invited me exactly once to a Christmas party where I'd been treated like an unwelcome stranger in my own son's home. When I'd tried to plan other visits, there were always excuses. Work trips, social obligations, Veda being sick. Come on, sweetheart, I said to Veda, extending my hand. Grandpa will tuck you in. I don't think, Lucas began. I don't care what you think, I said, and my voice carried the weight of 34 years of fatherhood, of changing diapers and helping with homework and teaching him to drive and paying for college. She's my granddaughter, and I'm going to tuck her in. Veda ran to me and grabbed my hand, her small fingers warm and trusting. As we left the dining room, I heard Glenn Hart say something about family dynamics and stress, but I didn't care. For the first time all evening, I was doing something that felt right. Veda's room was a little girl's dream. Pink walls, stuffed animals, a canopy bed that looked like it belonged to a princess. But as I tucked her under her covers, I saw the same fear in her eyes that I'd noticed earlier. Grandpa, she whispered, are you going away again? I don't know, sweetheart. Why do you ask? She glanced toward her bedroom door, then leaned closer to me. Mommy and Daddy have been talking about you a lot. They think I can't hear them, but I can. They say you're going to go away and not come back. What else do they say? They talk about money and papers and they argue a lot. Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks nobody's looking. Kira crying. That seemed impossible. The woman downstairs was made of ice and ambition. Are they getting divorced? Veda asked, and the fear in her voice broke my heart. I don't know, honey, but whatever happens between your parents, it doesn't change how much I love you, okay? She nodded and hugged me tight. I love you too, Grandpa. As I kissed her forehead and turned off her light, I made a silent promise. Whatever Lucas and Kira were planning, I wouldn't let it hurt this little girl. I made my way back downstairs, but instead of returning to the dining room, I slipped toward the study. The decorative plant was still positioned in front of the door, but I managed to squeeze behind it. The door was locked, but the decorative glass panels allowed me to see inside. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate for someone who'd never been organized in his life. The desk was covered with neat stacks of papers, and I could see what looked like legal documents spread across the surface. There was a laptop open, its screen glowing in the darkened room. Find what you're looking for? I spun around to find Lucas standing behind me, his face a mask of cold fury. I was just snooping. You were snooping. He stepped closer, and for a moment, I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. That's private property, Dad. My private property. Since when do you lock rooms in your own house? Since I got tired of people who don't respect boundaries. We stared at each other in the hallway, and I realized that whatever relationship we'd once had was truly gone. The boy I'd raised, the young man I'd been proud of, was gone. In his place stood someone who looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. I think it's time for you to leave, he said quietly. I think you're right. I walked back to the dining room, where the dinner party was winding down. Glenn Hart was helping himself to another glass of wine. The Morrisons were looking at their phones. Dr. Wells was checking her watch. I'm afraid I need to head home, I announced. Thank you for dinner, Kira. It was enlightening. She rose from her chair with perfect grace. Of course, Martin. I'm so glad you could join us. Yes, Glenn Hart said, raising his glass in a mock toast. Here's to family reunions and new beginnings. The way he said it made my skin crawl. As I gathered my coat and said my goodbyes, I caught Mrs. Rojas watching me from the kitchen doorway. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head and mouthed a single word. Careful. I drove home through empty streets, my mind racing. The dinner had been a setup, but for what? What were they planning, and why did they need me there to witness it? As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Cafe on Main Street. Come alone. Monsieur Rojas. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Whatever was happening, Mrs. Rojas held at least some of the answers, and tomorrow I was going to get them. The Riverside Cafe was the kind of place that survived on coffee and conversation, worn wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and the comfortable buzz of people who had nowhere else to be on a Sunday afternoon. I arrived early and chose a corner table where I could watch the door. Mrs. Rojas entered at exactly 2 o'clock, looking nervous and checking over her shoulder like she expected to be followed. She was dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a simple sweater, but she carried herself with the same quiet dignity I'd noticed at the dinner party. "Mr. Yeager," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the warning last night, though I have to ask, why? You barely know me." She was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate precision. "I have worked for many families, senor. Rich families, poor families, good families, bad families. I learned to watch, to listen. And what I see in that house," she shook her head, "it is not right." "What exactly did you see?" "Papers," she said quietly. "Many papers with your name. Legal papers. And I hear them talking, Mrs. Kira and Mr. Lucas. They think I do not understand English so good, but I understand everything." My chest tightened. "What kind of papers?" "Bank papers, property papers, something about—" She struggled with the words. "Power of attorney and a will." "A will? Whose will?" "Yours, senor." The coffee cup slipped in my hands, hot liquid sloshing onto the table. "That's impossible. I haven't written a will, and I certainly haven't given anyone power of attorney." "But the papers, they have your signature. I see it myself." "That's impossible," I repeated, but even as I said it, pieces began falling into place. The locked study, the formal dinner party with witnesses, Glenn Hart's comments about Monday morning bank appointments. "There is more," Mrs. Rojas continued. "Friday night, before you come to dinner, I am cleaning Mr. Lucas's study. I am not supposed to go in there, but the door was open and I see the mess. Papers everywhere, like someone has been working very hard." "What kind of papers?" "Copies of your signature, senor. Many copies, like someone is practicing, and bank statements with your name, but not your address. The address is Mr. Lucas's house." A wave of icy shock washed over me. "They're forging my signature." "See, and Mrs. Kira, she is on the phone with the bank. She tells them you are moving in with them, that you are, how do you say, not able to take care of yourself anymore." "Incompetent," I said grimly. "They're trying to have me declared incompetent," Mrs. Rojas nodded. "And the dinner last night, all those people, they are witnesses, to see that you are confused, angry, not thinking clear." I thought back to the evening, how they'd baited me into losing my temper, how Glenn Hart had made comments about stress and family dynamics. It had all been carefully orchestrated. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You could lose your job?" Her eyes hardened. "My own father passed away when I was young. My mother, she worked for a rich family in Mexico. They stole from her, took her savings, said she was too old and incapable of understanding money. She ended up poor and alone because she trusted the wrong people." She leaned forward. "I will not watch it happen again." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Maria. Thank you for being brave." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. "There is something else. Yesterday, after you leave, I hear Mrs. Kira on the phone. She is talking to someone about a meeting tomorrow, today, at the bank. She say everything will be finished by Monday." I unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of a bank document showing my account information and a pending transfer authorization. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but I knew I'd never signed it. "How did you get this?" "Mrs. Kira, she print many copies. She think I am just the stupid maid who cannot read, but I take pictures with my phone and I print this at the library." I studied the document more carefully. The transfer was for the entire contents of my savings account, nearly $50,000, to be moved into a joint account belonging to Lucas and Kira Yeager. "Maria," I said slowly, "I need you to do something for me, something that might be dangerous." She straightened in her chair. "What do you need?" "I need you to keep working for them for a few more days. Keep watching, keep listening. Can you do that?" "Si, but senor, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to stop them." After Maria left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, making plans. My first call was to Nelson Park, my old colleague from the engineering firm. Nelson had retired the same year I did, but he'd gone back to school and become a notary and paralegal. If anyone could help me navigate the legal aspects of what Lucas and Kira were planning, it was Nelson. "Martin," Nelson's voice boomed through the phone. "How the hell are you? I haven't heard from you in months." I need help, Nelson. Legal help. His tone immediately became serious. What's going on? I gave him a condensed version of the situation, the forged signatures, the bank documents, the dinner party setup. When I finished, there was a long silence. Jesus, Martin, your own son? Apparently so. Okay, here's what we need to do. First, you need to get to your bank first thing Monday morning and put a hold on all your accounts. Tell them you suspect fraud. Second, we need to document everything, every conversation, every document Maria can get her hands on, every witness we can find. What about the forged signatures? That's a felony, my friend. If we can prove they forged your signature with intent to commit fraud, they're looking at serious jail time. Even Lucas. Nelson's voice softened. Even Lucas. I know he's your son, but what they're doing, it's elder abuse, Martin. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The courts take this stuff very seriously. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Veda, about the fear in her eyes, about how this would affect her when everything came crashing down. But then I remembered Maria's story about her mother, and I knew I couldn't let Lucas and Kira get away with this. Monday morning came gray and drizzly. I was at the bank when it opened at 9 o'clock, and I asked to speak to the manager immediately. Derek Vero was a serious young man in his 30s who listened to my story with increasing concern. When I showed him the photocopied document Maria had given me, his expression darkened. Mr. Yeager, this is very troubling. Let me pull up your account information. He typed rapidly on his computer, frowning at the screen. I see several recent inquiries about your accounts, and there's a pending authorization for a significant transfer. I didn't authorize any transfer. The signature on file appears to match your previous signatures, but... He paused, studying the screen more carefully. There are some inconsistencies, small ones, but they're there. What kind of inconsistencies? The pressure points are different, the way you form certain letters. It's subtle, but our fraud detection software flagged it for manual review. Thank God for technology. I need to freeze all my accounts immediately, I said, and I want to file a formal fraud complaint. Absolutely. And Mr. Yeager? You should know that someone called this morning asking about the status of your transfer. A woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law. What did you tell her? Nothing. Bank policy prohibits us from discussing account details with anyone not listed as an authorized contact. He paused. She seemed quite upset when I told her that. I bet she was. As I left the bank, my phone rang. Lucas. Dad, we need to talk. Do we? There seems to be some confusion at the bank about your accounts. No confusion on my end, Lucas. My accounts are exactly where they should be. There was a long pause. Dad, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We're trying to help you, to make sure your finances are properly managed. By stealing them? That's a very ugly accusation. It's a very ugly crime. Another pause. I think you need to calm down and think about what's best for everyone, including Veda. The threat was subtle but clear. Don't you dare use that little girl against me. I'm not using anyone against anyone. I'm trying to keep this family together, but if you're going to be unreasonable... He let the sentence hang, and I understood. Cooperate, or lose access to my granddaughter forever. I'll be reasonable, Lucas, but on my terms, not yours. That afternoon, Maria called me from a payphone. Senor, they are very angry. Mrs. Kira, she is throwing things and screaming. Mr. Lucas, he is making many phone calls. They know you stopped them. Are you safe? For now. But I think I cannot stay much longer. They are watching me different now. Can you get me one more thing? I need proof of the forged signatures. Photos, documents, anything that shows they were practicing my signature. I will try. But, senor, you must be careful. They are desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things. That evening, I called Nelson and updated him on the day's events. He was pleased that I'd frozen my accounts, but worried about what Lucas and Kira might do next. They've committed multiple felonies, Martin. Forgery, attempted fraud, conspiracy. They're looking at serious prison time if this goes to court. What are the chances they'll just give up and walk away? 0. They've invested too much in this plan. They'll try something else. Like what? I don't know, but we need to be ready for anything. As if on cue, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Glenn Hart standing on my doorstep, holding an official-looking envelope. Mr. Yeager, he called through the door. I have some documents that require your immediate attention. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. What kind of documents? Legal documents, regarding your son's concerns about your mental competency. My heart sank. They were trying to have me declared incompetent through the courts. I'm not signing anything, I said. You don't have to sign anything. These are court papers. You're being summoned for a competency hearing. He slid the envelope through the gap in the door. The hearing is scheduled for Friday. I'd recommend you get yourself a good lawyer, Mr. Yeager. Your son has some very compelling evidence about your recent erratic behavior. As I watched him walk away, I realized the war was just beginning. But this time, I was ready for them. The competency hearing papers made for grim reading. Lucas and Kira had painted a picture of a confused, paranoid old man who was no longer capable of managing his own affairs. They cited my outburst at the dinner party, my irrational suspicions about their motives, and my inability to recognize help when offered. They'd also included statements from the dinner party guests, Glenn Hart, the Morrisons, and Dr. Wells, all describing my erratic behavior and aggressive demeanor. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, taking my justified anger and reframing it as evidence of mental decline. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both me and the allies I'd gathered. Nelson arrived at my apartment Tuesday morning with a briefcase full of legal documents and a grim expression. This is serious, Martin. They're not just going after your money anymore. They're going after your freedom. What do you mean? If they succeed in having you declared incompetent, Lucas becomes your legal guardian. He'll have complete control over your finances, your medical decisions, even where you live. You could end up in a nursing home against your will. The thought sent a chill straight through me. Can they really do that? If they convince a judge, yes. But the good news is that competency hearings require a high standard of proof, and we have some advantages they don't know about. Such as? Nelson opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Maria's evidence, for starters. The photos she took of the forged signature practice sheets, the bank's fraud detection report, and I've been doing some digging into Glenn Hart. What did you find? Our HOA president has some interesting financial troubles. His construction company went bankrupt last year, and he owes back taxes on his house. Guess who's been helping him with his legal fees? Lucas and Kira. Exactly. In exchange for his testimony about your mental state. It's witness tampering, and it's another felony. My phone rang. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. Senor, I have what you need, but I cannot stay here anymore. They are watching me too close. Where are you? The library on Elm Street. Can you come? We'll be right there. Nelson and I found Maria in the back corner of the library, hunched over a computer terminal. She looked exhausted and frightened, but her eyes were determined. I have everything, she said, handing me a manila envelope. Pictures of the practice signatures, copies of bank forms with your forged name, and something else, a recording. A recording of what? Mrs. Kira and Mr. Lucas talking about the plan. I used my phone to record them yesterday when they think I am vacuuming upstairs. She pulled out her phone and played the audio. The quality was poor, but the voices were unmistakable. Told you the old man would be suspicious, Lucas was saying. It doesn't matter, Kira replied. The competency hearing will take care of everything. Once he's declared incompetent, we'll have full access to his accounts. What about the maid? She's been acting strange. We'll fire her after the hearing. Can't risk her talking to anyone. And if the hearing doesn't go our way? There was a pause, then Kira's voice, cold as winter. Then we'll have to consider other options. Accidents happen to confused old men all the time. Nelson and I exchanged a look. That last comment crossed the line from fraud into something much darker. Maria, I said quietly, you need to disappear for a while. Do you have somewhere safe to go? My sister lives in the next town. I can stay with her. Good. Don't go back to the house. Don't contact Lucas or Kira. Just disappear until this is over. She nodded and gathered her things. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to me. Senor, there is one more thing. Little Veda, she is not safe in that house. They argue in front of her, and she is scared all the time. When this is over, you must help her. After Maria left, Nelson and I spent the rest of the day preparing our defense. We organized the evidence, prepared witness statements, and researched case law on competency hearings. But more importantly, we planned our own counterattack. Here's what's going to happen, Nelson explained. We're going to let them present their case first. Let them commit to their story under oath. Then we're going to systematically destroy every claim they've made. What about Veda? If this goes public, if Lucas and Kira end up in jail? One crisis at a time, my friend. First, we keep you out of a nursing home. Then we worry about custody arrangements. Wednesday brought an unexpected development. Derek Varro from the bank called with disturbing news. Mr. Yeager, we've had another inquiry about your accounts, this time from someone claiming to be your attorney. I haven't authorized any attorney to access my account information. That's what I figured. But sir, there's something else. We've discovered additional forged documents in our system. Someone has been very busy trying to establish a paper trail for financial guardianship. How is that possible? It appears they had inside help. One of our employees has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The web of corruption was wider than I'd imagined. Lucas and Kira hadn't just forged documents, they'd bribed bank employees to help them. Thursday evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Grandpa. Veda's voice was small and frightened. Veda? Sweetheart, where are you? I'm in my room. Mommy and Daddy are fighting again. Really loud fighting. Daddy said bad words about you, and Mommy threw a glass at the wall. My heart broke for her. Are you safe, honey? I think so, but Grandpa, I'm scared. They keep talking about you going away, and they say I won't see you anymore. Listen to me very carefully, Veda. No matter what happens, I will always love you, and I will always try to be part of your life. Do you understand? Yes, Grandpa. If you ever feel unsafe, if Mommy and Daddy scare you, I want you to call 911. Can you remember that number? 911. That's right. And then you call me, promise? I promise. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the phone. Tomorrow's hearing would determine not just my future, but hers as well. If Lucas and Kira succeeded in having me declared incompetent, Veda would be trapped in a house with two people who were willing to commit multiple felonies for money. Friday morning dawned clear and cold. The courthouse was an imposing brick building that had seen decades of family dramas play out in its sterile rooms. Nelson met me on the steps, carrying 2 briefcases and wearing his most serious suit. Ready for this? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, let them talk first. Let them dig their own graves. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Lucas and Kira sat at one table with their attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit. Glenn Hart sat in the gallery, along with the Morrisons and Dr. Wells. Judge Patricia Manning was a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable. She called the hearing to order with the efficiency of someone who had no patience for nonsense. This is a petition for guardianship based on alleged mental incompetency, she announced. The petitioners claim that Martin Yeager is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. Mr. Yeager is represented by counsel and contests these allegations. We'll hear from the petitioners first. Lucas and Kira's attorney painted a devastating picture. She described my paranoid delusions about my own family, my aggressive outbursts at social gatherings, and my inability to recognize reality. Glenn Hart testified about my behavior at the dinner party, describing me as confused and belligerent. The Morrisons echoed his testimony, claiming I seemed disoriented and suspicious of everyone. Dr. Wells, speaking as a medical professional, suggested that my behavior was consistent with early-stage dementia or other cognitive decline. Lucas took the stand last, and his performance was Oscar-worthy. He spoke about his concern for my welfare, his attempts to help me manage my finances, and his heartbreak over my rejection of his assistance. My father has become increasingly paranoid and isolated, he said, his voice heavy with manufactured emotion. He sees conspiracies where none exist. He refuses help from people who love him. I'm afraid he's going to hurt himself or make financial decisions that will leave him destitute. When Kira testified, she focused on my erratic behavior and inappropriate accusations. She painted herself as a concerned daughter-in-law who only wanted what was best for the family. By the time they finished presenting their case, I looked like a paranoid, delusional old man who was a danger to himself and others. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed their story myself. Then it was our turn. Nelson stood up with quiet confidence. Your Honor, we will demonstrate that the petitioner's claims are not only false, but are part of an elaborate criminal conspiracy to defraud Mr. Yeager of his life savings. The judge raised an eyebrow. That's a serious accusation, Counselor. Yes, Your Honor, and we have serious evidence to support it. Nelson began with Derek Vero's testimony about the forged bank documents and the attempted fraudulent transfers. The bank manager's professional, detailed account of the forgery attempts was devastating to Lucas and Kira's credibility. Then came Maria's evidence, the photos of signature practice sheets, the recorded conversation, the copies of forged documents. As Nelson played the audio of Lucas and Kira discussing their plan to steal my money, I watched the color drain from their faces. But the coup de grace came when Nelson called his surprise witness, the bank employee who had been bribed to help with the forgery. Janet Morrison, not the neighbor, but a different Janet Morrison who worked in the bank's trust department, had been offered $5,000 to help create false documentation for my accounts. She'd initially agreed, but had second thoughts when she realized the scope of the fraud. They wanted me to create a paper trail showing that Mr. Yeager was mentally incompetent and needed financial assistance, she testified. They provided forged signatures and asked me to backdate documents to make it look like the process had been ongoing for months. When Nelson finished presenting our evidence, the courtroom was silent. Judge Manning looked at Lucas and Kira with undisguised disgust. "Mr. Yeager," she said, turning to Lucas, "do you have any explanation for this evidence?" Lucas's attorney whispered frantically in his ear, but he just sat there, his face pale and sweaty. "Your Honor," his attorney finally said, "we request a recess to review this new evidence." Motion denied. "Mr. Yeager, I'm asking you directly. Did you forge your father's signature on bank documents?" Lucas looked at his wife, at Glenn Hart, at his expensive attorney. Then he looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the scared little boy he used to be. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. We just needed the money. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. This hearing is concluded. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. As the bailiff approached their table, Kira finally broke. "This is all his fault," she screamed, pointing at me. "He's a selfish old man who doesn't care about his own family." "Ma'am, you need to calm down," the bailiff said. "He has money just sitting in accounts while we struggle to pay for Veda's school, for the house, for everything. He owes us." "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. "But you're right about one thing. I am selfish. I was selfish enough to want to keep the money my parents left me. I was selfish enough to want to maintain control over my own life. And I was selfish enough to not want to be robbed by my own son." As Lucas and Kira were led away in handcuffs, Glenn Hart tried to slip out of the courtroom, but Nelson had anticipated that. "Your Honor, Mr. Hart was also part of this conspiracy. We have evidence that he accepted bribes in exchange for false testimony." The judge motioned to the bailiff, who intercepted Glenn at the door. In the end, it took less than an hour to destroy a scheme that had been months in the planning. But as I watched my son being led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, bone-weary sadness. The real victim in all of this was Veda, and now I had to figure out how to help her pick up the pieces of her shattered world. 3 months after the hearing, I stood in the kitchen of my old house, the one my parents had left me, the one Lucas and Kira had tried to steal, but now it served a different purpose. Now it was home to an 8-year-old girl who needed stability more than anything else in the world. Veda sat at the kitchen table, coloring in a book while I made her lunch. She'd been living with me for 6 weeks now, ever since the family court judge had awarded me temporary custody. The transition hadn't been easy for either of us, but we were learning to be a family. "Grandpa," she said without looking up from her coloring, "will Mommy and Daddy come home soon?" It was a question she asked almost every day, and I still hadn't found the right way to answer it. Lucas was serving 18 months in minimum security prison for fraud and conspiracy. Kira had received 2 years, and Glenn Hart was doing 6 months for his role in the scheme. "They made some very bad choices, sweetheart," I said, sitting down across from her. "And when adults make bad choices, sometimes they have to go away for a while to think about what they did." "But they're still my mommy and daddy." "Yes, they are. And they still love you, even though they made mistakes." It was a lie, at least partially. I wasn't sure Lucas and Kira were capable of loving anyone more than they loved money and status. But Veda needed to believe her parents loved her, even if they'd proven incapable of putting her needs first. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window, I saw Nelson's car in the driveway. "Uncle Nelson's here," Veda announced, brightening considerably. She'd taken to calling him Uncle Nelson, and he'd embraced the honorary title with enthusiasm. Nelson entered carrying a grocery bag and wearing his usual cheerful grin. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" "We're good," Veda said. "Grandpa's making grilled cheese." "The man makes a mean grilled cheese," Nelson agreed, settling into a chair at the table. "Veda, I brought you something." He reached into the bag and pulled out a new coloring book. Horses this time, which had become her latest obsession. "Thank you, Uncle Nelson." She hugged him tightly, and I saw his eyes get a little misty. Nelson had never had children of his own, and Veda had filled a space in his life he hadn't known was empty. Actually," Nelson said, "I came by to talk to your grandpa about some boring legal stuff. Think you could color in the living room for a few minutes?" Veda gathered her things and skipped off to the other room, humming to herself. Her resilience amazed me daily. Despite everything she'd been through, the arrests, the media attention, the upheaval of her entire life, she remained fundamentally optimistic about the world. How's she really doing? Nelson asked once she was out of earshot. Better than I expected. The child psychologist says she's processing everything remarkably well. Kids are more adaptable than we give them credit for. And how are you doing? That was a harder question to answer. Taking care of an 8-year-old at my age was exhausting. My quiet retirement had been replaced by school pickups and homework help and bedtime stories. But it was also the most meaningful thing I'd done in years. I'm tired, I admitted. But it's a good tired, if that makes sense. Perfect sense. You've got purpose again. Nelson pulled some papers from his briefcase. I have updates on the legal situation. Lucas's attorney has been in touch about a plea modification. What kind of modification? He wants to reduce his sentence in exchange for cooperation in recovering the money they spent. Apparently there are some assets hidden in offshore accounts. I considered this. Lucas and Kira had blown through most of my stolen money on their house, cars, and lifestyle. But if there were hidden assets, those could go toward Veda's future. What would cooperation involve? Full disclosure of all financial transactions, assistance in asset recovery, and formal restitution agreements. In exchange, his sentence would be reduced to time served plus probation. What do you think? Nelson shrugged. Financially, it makes sense. You'd recover more money for Veda's college fund. Personally, that's your call. He's still your son. My son. The phrase felt strange now. The young man in prison bore my name and shared my DNA, but he wasn't the boy I'd raised. That boy had been replaced somewhere along the way by someone I didn't recognize. Set up the meeting, I said finally. But I want to talk to him first. Alone. The prison visiting room was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant. Lucas looked older than his 34 years, his hair unkempt and his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he used to wear. We sat across from each other at a metal table, separated by years of resentment and recent betrayal. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. You look good, Dad, he said finally. Prison looks less good on you. He laughed bitterly. Yeah, well, the accommodations aren't what I'm used to. How's Kira handling it? Not well. She blames you for everything. Says if you'd just been reasonable, none of this would have happened. Do you blame me too? Lucas was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. I used to. For the first month, I convinced myself that you were the villain in this story, that you were a selfish old man who didn't care about his family. And now? Now I realize I don't even know what family means. He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. How's Veda? She's good. She misses you. Does she hate me? She's 8 years old, Lucas. She doesn't understand hate yet. She just knows her parents went away, and she doesn't know why. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I messed up, didn't I? I ruined everything. Yes, you did. Can you ever forgive me? It was the question I'd been dreading because I didn't have an answer. Part of me, the father part, wanted to wrap him in my arms and tell him everything would be okay. But the rationale part, the part that remembered the fear in Veda's voice and the coldness in his eyes, wasn't ready for forgiveness. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday, but right now, I'm more concerned about your daughter than I am about you. He nodded, accepting that. Will you tell her I love her? Do you? Really? Yes. I know I did a poor job of showing it, but I do love her. Then prove it. Cooperate with the asset recovery. Help us get back the money you stole. Give her a future. Okay, I'll do whatever you want. I don't want you to do it for me, Lucas. I want you to do it for her. As I left the prison that day, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope for a reconciliation with Lucas. That might never happen. But hope that Veda would have the financial security she deserved, and hope that maybe, somewhere deep inside, her father still had a functioning conscience. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of my house, watching Veda play on the swing set Nelson and I had installed. She was laughing as she pumped her legs, trying to swing higher than the apple tree branches. Grandpa, look how high I can go, she called out. I see you, sweetheart. Be careful. Maria Rojas emerged from the house, carrying a tray of lemonade. She'd started working for me part-time, helping with household tasks and occasionally watching Veda when I had appointments. More than that, she'd become a trusted friend and ally. She is a good girl, Maria said, setting the tray on the picnic table. Happy girl? She is. Finally. The asset recovery had been more successful than anyone had expected. Lucas and Kira had hidden nearly $200,000 in various accounts, all of which was now in a trust fund for Veda's education and future. Combined with my own savings and the sale of Lucas's house, She would be financially secure for life. "Mr. Martin," Maria said carefully, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" "Mrs. Kira, she calls me last week, from prison." I tensed. What did she want? "She wants me to lie for her, to say that I made up the evidence, that I was angry about being fired. She offers me money." "What did you tell her?" Maria smiled grimly. "I tell her that some things are not for sale. That little girl's future is not for sale." That evening, after Veda was in bed, I sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood settle into quiet. It had been almost a year since that disastrous dinner party, and my life had been completely transformed. I was no longer a lonely retiree with too much time and too little purpose. I was a guardian, a protector, a father figure to a little girl who needed me. It wasn't the retirement I'd planned, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I worried it might be Kira, but when I opened it, I found something unexpected. "Dad, I know I have no right to ask, but could you send me a picture of Veda? I think about her every day. Lucas." I looked through my phone's photo gallery until I found a recent picture of Veda at the park, grinning widely as she fed ducks by the pond. She looked happy and healthy and loved. I typed back, "She's doing well. She starts 3rd grade next week. She still asks about you." A few minutes later, another message. "Thank you for everything, for taking care of her, for being the father I couldn't be." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Be better when you get out. She'll need a father, not just a guardian." "I will, I promise." Whether he meant it or not, only time would tell. But for now, Veda was safe, loved, and surrounded by people who would protect her. And sometimes that's the best any of us can do. As I prepared to go inside, I heard a small voice from upstairs. "Grandpa, can you come tuck me in?" "Coming, sweetheart." I climbed the stairs to Veda's room, where she was already under her covers, clutching her favorite stuffed horse. "Grandpa," she said as I sat on the edge of her bed, "do you think Mommy and Daddy will be different when they come home?" "I hope so, honey. People can change if they really want to." "I hope they change too. I want them to be happy like us." "Like us. Happy like us?" "I love you, Veda," I said, kissing her forehead. "I love you too, Grandpa. Thank you for taking care of me." As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized that despite everything, the betrayal, the legal battles, the upheaval, I was grateful. Grateful that Mrs. Rojas had been brave enough to warn me. Grateful that Nelson had been willing to help. Grateful that the truth had prevailed. But most of all, I was grateful for the little girl sleeping peacefully upstairs, who had given my life meaning and purpose when I thought those days were behind me. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest blessings. Sometimes losing a son means gaining a daughter, and sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Veda giggling in the kitchen. I found her sitting at the table with Maria, who was teaching her to make pancakes in Spanish. "Buenos dias, Grandpa," Veda called out, beaming with pride at her pronunciation. "Good morning, sweetheart. What are you learning today?" "Maria is teaching me how to cook. She says every girl should know how to make her own breakfast." Very wise advice. As I watched my granddaughter flip her first pancake, slightly lopsided but perfectly golden, I thought about the future. There would be challenges ahead. Lucas and Kira would eventually be released from prison, and we'd have to navigate those relationships carefully. Veda would have questions as she got older, questions about why her parents had made the choices they did. But for now, in this moment, we were simply a family having breakfast together. An unlikely family, perhaps. A retired engineer, a young girl, and a brave housekeeper who'd risked everything to do what was right, but a family nonetheless. "Grandpa," Veda said, presenting me with a plate of her homemade pancakes. "These are for you, because you're the best grandpa in the whole world." I took a bite of the slightly burnt, wonderfully imperfect pancake and smiled. "These are delicious, sweetheart. The best pancakes I've ever had." And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of ordinary mornings to come, I knew that everything we'd been through had been worth it. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment or revenge. Sometimes it's simply about protecting the innocent and building something better from the ashes of what was broken. Sometimes it's about a little girl learning to make pancakes while speaking Spanish, safe in the knowledge that she is loved and protected and valued for exactly who she is. Sometimes it's about second chances and new beginnings and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's about discovering that the family you need isn't always the family you started with, but it's always the family worth fighting for.